Let's do some drywall.
Hello everybody, we're on a job today. I'm going to be skimming out a wall for wallpaper. A lot of people have textured walls, they have to skim it out for wallpaper. They like to have a smooth wall. You don't have to do it, but they recommend you have a smooth wall, at least pretty smooth wall for the wallpaper to stick so you don't see the texture under the wallpaper. So this is going to be a 2-coat process. I'm just going to use a regular joint compound for the first coat, and then I'm going to come back and do a second coat. So first things first, you want to get your mud ready. I'm just using a joint compound, a fresh box. I dumped it in the bucket. I like to mix my mud in the bucket. It's pretty thick, so you want to add some fresh water. Always add fresh water. We're going to thin it down. You don't want to make it super thin, but we can't skim with a heavy mud. You could try it, but it's not going to look good. So we want to make this a nice creamy mud. I would say like a really heavy pancake batter. Mix it up. If you don't have a electric or cordless mixer, you can always use a hand stomper, potato masher, good old fashioned, just takes a little more elbow grease. But mix this up thoroughly. This cordless one I use works nice because I'm in the field, so I don't have to run a cord. Get all the mud on the bottom of the bucket, get that water down to the bottom. Mix up. Fresh mud's real clumpy, so you gotta mix the fresh right out of the box mud. You gotta mix it up pretty good. Even though it's pre-mixed, you still gotta mix it up nice and creamy. You want it creamy mud so it goes on with no clumps and blemishes. Mud's still fairly heavy. Right now I'd say it's like good for second coat mud. I just want a tad bit thinner. This would be perfect probably for you to skim with. You don't want it too thin, because if your mud's too thin, you're going to be making a big mess. You're going to be dropping mud all over the place. So sometimes not too thick, but just thick enough. It's just working with muds, you learn the thickness. I'd say, you know, second coat mud consistency is what we're looking for. I'd say that's good consistency. You can see it still sticks to the knife, but it's creamy, nice and creamed up mud. Go ahead and put away your mixing tools, get those out of the way. We're gonna go inside. The homeowner lives here, so I might not be doing too much talking. I'm just gonna get right to work. I'm going to be skimming out the walls. I'm using a big texture knife because I can cover a lot of square footage. But if you're skimming, you can get away with doing like a 10, 12, or even a 14-inch knife. And we're not putting the mud on super heavy either. You want to kind of do a tight skim coat since you're going to follow through with the second coat. If you want a perfectly smooth wall, you'd probably do a third coat and sand in between coats. This is for wallpaper jobs, so they can wallpaper it. But the same principle goes in fact if you want to skim your walls to get rid of rough, ugly textures, or if you want to do smooth walls. Basic smooth wall would be 2 coats. Perfect smooth walls get into 3 or 4 coats, and you sand in between coats when you're working with the joint compounds. I'm not going to use a hot mud on this because the job's close to my residence, so it's easy for me to come back and do a second coat. No hurry, we're just going to get this first coat on, let it dry overnight, and then we'll come back and do a real tight second coat. And that way they can turn around and primer it, then wallpaper it. But let's go ahead and get inside. When I get inside, I'm going to put tarps on the floor, mask the baseboard, set up my bench to do the high stuff. I'm going to start on the tops. The tops mean from the ceiling down, and then bring the bottom up. So always start on your tops. You don't want to start on your bottoms, start on your tops, and your mud drops on your bottoms. So always start on your tops whenever possible. But let's go ahead and get inside, get everything set up, and get to work skimming out the wall. 2 coats, skim coats, so they can wallpaper it. Sorry about the texture, but they have like a splatter type texture, so they just want to skim it out. So I'm just going to put some tarps on the floor. They got a router and stuff plugged in. So I'm going to work around that and unplug it when I have to, because they are needing internet, so I don't want to disconnect the router until I have to. Some stuff on the walls. Once I get this all masked off, I also want to mask off the baseboard so I don't get mud kicked on the baseboard, so we can just skim tighter down to the base area. We're just going to skim it real tight. After I get it masked off, I'm just going to give a pre-scrape to the walls. I'm going to scrape it with my 6-inch knife. That just gets any goobers. Scraping is good enough. Some people like to sand it. Scraping is all you need to do. I have a masking machine. I'm just going to use this on my baseboard. Of course, you don't need one of these. If you have one, use it. If not, just put masking tape on your baseboard, just so you don't get mud all over your base. Get this done. Push your tape down. All right. Scrape everything with your knife. Just gets all the little stuff off, goobers, and a whole lot of stuff. Mud. So let's go ahead and get that mud that we mixed downstairs. It's not a large wall, it's 11 foot by 8 foot. So we're just going to do tight skim. Like I said, you can just use a regular knife. We're just going to skim it, not put it down heavy. You want to kind of skim it tight. Skim it tight. If you skim it tight, there'll be less sanding involved. If you put the mud on too heavy, you're going to have to sand it down. So you just want to do a tight skim coat for the first coat on skimming walls. Panel mud. Use your skim knife, 10, 12, 14. I'm going to use a big texture knife. Basically start on top. Put the mud on. No big deal. I like to get the whole area put on before I trim it down. Basically, I'm going to get that whole paint on. Working on a 4x4 foot area. Just make sure you got plenty of mud on everything. Alright, now you can knock it down. This is when it's easier with a smaller knife. Tight skin coat. Don't get too heavy. Sometimes you will have clumps still in the wall if you didn't scrape it good enough. Take a second and just scratch them out of there, get them off the wall. They'll leave high humps if you don't get rid of them. And skim out. I'm pulling the knife down hard and taking off extra mud. Any lap marks, reach over it, get rid of your lap marks. You can pull any direction. The whole goal here is just to skim it tight with minimal lap marks. Lap marks are what the knife leaves when you overlap it, as you cut on the mark. There you go. Did a 4x4 area. Now I'm going to just bring the bottom up with the remainder of the knife. Use up all the mud I can. See how far I can go. Plenty of refill. Alright, that's all my mud. Trowel down. Trowel down. really pull it tighter by the base area. You don't want a big clump of mud on where the baseboard is. To run out of mud, you gotta get more mud. I have the mud right here, so I can just scoop it out as I need it. Another pan full. Okay. Keep going. You want to pull it really tight against the baseboard, you can use your smaller knife. Just run it really tight. Take the extra mud on. You don't want to clump it heavy on the bottom. Put in your angles. It's just a tight coat. If you miss any areas, just fill them in and go back into it. I'm just taking off my lap marks. You're always going to have lap marks. You're going to try to take them off. So I already did that whole section. I used a pan and a half of mud. So we're just going to keep going. Move on to the next area. Always start your tops, bring it down. Bring it down. Pull it tight. Pull it tight. You can go every which way, it doesn't matter. You're just doing a tight fill. Skim coat. Skim coat. Skim coat. Alright, now I'm to this bottom part. Just working my way over. Working around the detail around these wires instead of unplugging everything, which is easier of course. I'm just going to use a smaller knife. Doesn't have to be exact, we're just doing a fill coat, filling in this rough splattered texture, first coat. I'm going to disconnect the router and disrupt the homeowners' work that they're doing. So they're working on the computer, so I don't want to disconnect the internet. Don't want to inconvenience nobody. So we're going to work around this. Maybe the second coat I'll unplug it to get more detail. But just for now, we're just doing a skim coat, tight skim coat. I haven't even used my second can of mud yet. Maybe you have ugly texture in your house that you're tired of looking at. It's real rough. Or there's so many repairs done over the years that you can see every repair on the wall. Well, guess what? You're going to have to skim it out like this and start new. Instead of trying to skim out your whole house or whole bedroom, how about just skim out one wall at a time, one ceiling at a time. You get done with this wall or this room, then you can move on to the next. Just like that. That's all skimmed out. I haven't used 2 full pans of mud yet. I'm not ready to finish. I like to skim coat with joint compounds because they can soak into the wall overnight, shrink back. I think it gives it a better bond. If you're trying to get this done in one day, then you would have to do a first coat with the hot mud. Let it set up, slick it out, and then follow it through with a tight second coat. You get hot mud and your joint compound. Same thing here. Bring the tops down. Bring the tops down. Mud off. do everything off your ladder, off your step, and then you can bring down the bottoms up. I'm going to work on the midsection here. Midsection. So you can see the bigger knife, it covers a lot more groundwork, but there's a lot more knife work. If you're a newbie, just use like a 10 or a 12-inch knife. I like this knife because it's hardly noticeable. There's minimal lap marks. Not a bunch of knife edges. It leaves a nicer skim finish for me because they cover more square footage. Got a little more mud here in my pants, so I'm just going to use it up. Any light areas, just add a little more mud. Go back over it. One more knife. Full of mud here. Draw down those lap marks. Look at that. I'm going to get a half mark pan. And then we're just going to finish up this bottom part. And that's it. That's first coated. With joint compounds, always let them dry overnight. Rule of thumb's overnight. Let them set. Sometimes you can open a window, put some air movement on. I don't recommend putting a fan directly on drywall mud. Maybe a fan in the room to circulate the air to get the humidity out of the room. But just let the joint compounds do its thing. They're going to dry how they should dry overnight. Like I said, around detail, just use a smaller knife. Go ahead. Skim out. Skim out. Skim out. Skim out. This is an easy job anyone can do. Just do one wall at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself with drywall work. One wall at a time, one room at a time is how you do skim outs. This is a wallpaper wall, but the same skim technique goes out into skimming out walls to retexture, just skimming out walls and leave smooth. So there you go. I didn't use 3 full pans of mud, less than 30 minutes. Skim it all out, I didn't have to disconnect none of that. Extra tight around the base area, the angles. That's good for a first coat. Joint compound first coat. As it dries, you may get bubbles here and there. Don't worry. Just let it be. Let it dry. If you skim it good enough, you may have a few lap marks. And your next step, instead of sanding all this and making a big dusty mess, you could probably scrape it. Just give it a knife scrape. And maybe just, if you need to sand, just sand the rough areas only. And then if you are going to do a second coat skim, sometimes it's better not to sand it too much because you don't want to sand over skimmed dust over dust. So you will get chatters like this. Those will scrape off. It's just better to leave it alone. Let it dry. Let the mud do its thing. It's going to dry. Good thing with skimming out walls, you fill in all the imperfections. I see a high spot there, an old patch, so it filled in that bad patch. You can see I didn't leave it heavy. When you leave it heavy, it's like that, but you can still see some of the texture showing through. That's what you want, a nice tight skim coat. So this will be a perfect wallpaper wall that they're going to do in their, I guess you'd say this is their office, den, nursery. I don't know what room this is, but it's a perfect accented wallpaper wall that they're going to do. I'm probably going to make a part 2 video, but part 2 is really going to be the same. I'm just going to scrape it again and do a really tight second coat. And then the second coat, I'm just going to skim coat it tight with a tad bit thinner mud. I'm just going to skim it real tight with my 14. I'm not going to use a big knife to do a second coat. I'm going to use a smaller knife so I can pull it tight. I don't want to put the mud on heavy. I just want to do a tight skim coat. And I'm going to do a tight second coat with a joint compound again. So basically you just leave this overnight, come back, or you can pull all this up and remask it. So I might just leave this overnight if the homeowner allows me, since this is a room they're not really using. But hey, easy enough. Skim it out, one wall at a time, and it's ready for wallpaper. You can probably wallpaper it after this dries, but I gave them a 2 coat price, so we're going to at least do 2 coats on it so they can put the wallpaper on the wall.